Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Does anyone have any stories or information about Dogmen? Can be personal accounts, stories you heard from somewhere else, or educated speculation. Did the Dogmen used to exist in the past, like in ancient Egypt? Do they still exist today? What do we know about them, especially in the pre-modern world? And modern sightings are also welcome. My personal viewpoint is that they are a sapient species who evolved from wolves.
This was about 23 years ago, and I had no clue what a dogman was, and I didn't believe in anything supernatural back then. I was hunting wild hogs in one of the southernmost areas of the Great Dismal Swamp. This is far south of the wildlife refuge where it ends at the Albemarle Sound in eastern North Carolina. I had put my boat in the water at a friend's house about a half hour by water from where I went into the swamp at. This was in late November, so it was pretty cold and really overcast, and it got dark around 5 or so. It was about noon when I tied up and got out of the boat. First hour or so was pretty uneventful. I was working my way inland. Some of this part of the swamp can be walked through when the tide is low, and it's just marshy with deeper canals and bogs scattered about, but there aren't any trails or marked paths or anything. So you really have to pay attention where you're going, and definitely need a compass since you can't see the sun. It's pretty dark there, even on bright and sunny days. I was back in there for about 2 hours and looked for signs of hogs. I could tell some had been back there at some point, but it had been a while. I got a little further in and started smelling what I had thought was a boar. It's rutting season, and male wild hogs have a very distinct smell. It's a musky and kind of fermented smell mixed with old poop and urine. Kind of hard to explain if you've never smelled it before. However, this was different. It was musky, but more like an outside dog that's soaking wet. I stopped to look and listen, and after 10 or so minutes, I started hearing a snuffling, breathing that came and went. After a bit, I started to hear some growling. I started to get a little freaked out because it didn't sound like a hog and it sounded big. I stopped again and knelt down and waited and looked around. Where I was at, the brush was pretty thick, so I really couldn't see more than 20 or so feet in any direction. That's when I started seeing movement. It definitely wasn't moving like a hog. It was kind of low walking, crouched down, but not on all fours, and I was only getting glimpses of it and it would stop. It was probably about 40 feet away. This is when I actually start getting scared. I was born in northeastern Kentucky and spent most of my free time as a kid in the woods, camping, riding dirt bikes, and have always been comfortable even in the deep woods, so when I moved to North Carolina, I fell in love with the swamp. This is the first time I think I had ever felt real and actual fear. I had a Mossberg 590 shotgun full of .300 buckshot, but no extra shells and no pistol. The 590 also has a bayonet lug, so I took out the bayonet and put it on. I started backing up, not taking my eyes off where I had last seen whatever it was. A few minutes later, I hear it again, a little further over to my left. I'm probably about 3/4 of a mile into the swamp, which doesn't seem very far, but the terrain doesn't make for really quick movement. This goes on for about another 20 minutes while backtracking out as fast as I can, and I'm still hearing it and catching glimpses of movement, and the smell is getting stronger. After a bit, I realize that this thing has gotten between me and the way I came in from my boat, and I'm starting to panic. I try to start getting further away from it and headed in the right direction, and then I see it again, and it's standing up and it's pretty damn tall. It was still back in the brush, so I could really make out any details as it's dark as hell back there. I wanted to cry and run, but I knew that was a bad. It didn't seem like it wanted to get in the water, so started wading through the canal headed back towards my boat. I started to put some distance between it and myself, so I got back on hard ground to move a little faster, but I can still hear it snuffling and growling and moving through the brush, but it's not close anymore. I made it back to my boat and I'm soaking wet and freezing, but I thank God I made it out of there and just in time as it's getting foggy and starting to drizzle. I had never been that scared in my life. I made it back to my buddy's house and told him what happened, and I can tell he knows something when I tell him where I went. He brings me in and gives me some hot coffee with a big slug of bourbon in it. When I calm down, he takes me to the other house out back of his property to where his granddad lives. I'd met his granddad before, but he had always been kinda standoffish to me. I found out later he just had real bad PTSD from Korea, and my buddy and his family had lived in that area since after the Civil War. I think his grandpa's great-granddad had been a slave around there, but that's a story for another day. I guess what meant to say is his family had history in that area and knew the place a lot better than me. After I told his granddad what happened, he stood up, looked me in the eye and said, "Don't go back in there. You're lucky you made it out. That's where the big dogs live." I left and went home and slept for about 18 hours. I tried to forget about that experience and started to believe I was just seeing shit and freaked myself out. I eventually forgot all about it until a few years ago when a Dogman Encounters video came up in my YouTube feed. I was curious what the hell a Dogman was, so I started listening to it, and that whole experience came flooding back to mind. It was very similar to what happened to me. I started looking into it, and there have been other sightings and encounters in eastern North Carolina. So that's my story. I'm 44 now and still live in coastal North Carolina, but haven't been back anywhere close to that area. I still hunt and love the outdoors and the swamp, but don't go too far in anymore.
A long time ago, I had a dream where one of them, a priest and some other humans, were heading into an abandoned brick building with a basement to fight some ancient evil or demon. The area seemed like North America. The woods and nature were encroaching on this brick building with a chain-link fence and non-maintained area. The priest had a holy box with something like a light bulb, light that he blessed, which would let them descend into the darkness. The Dogman had a metal breastplate that seemed invulnerable. He sprung a trap and tons of needles or nails hit him in the plate, which saved him. Some of the men did not make it. I know it seems like a lame combination of D&D on retelling, but it really felt quite spiritual at the time. Its posture was very upright and militaristic. At the time of the dream, I never had much belief in anything 2/X/ related except ghosts, and maybe UFOs. I don't necessarily believe any of the sightings of these things are physical beings, but brief spiritual manifestations. Same with some other phenomena.
My little brother and I walked around Washington one summer night last year, 2023. Washington is a little town in Pennsylvania. There isn't really much to do out here. He would be going to college next year, so I figured I'd do something nice and hang out with him before then. I'm self-employed, so I didn't really have to worry about putting in for vacation or anything. We spent nearly all of the winter playing my old Xbox 360 games like Halo 3 until the wee morning hours. Now I've been a fan of podcasts and YouTube videos where they talk about paranormal encounters forever, but I never imagined I'd have one myself. It was the night before Christmas. It was a picture-perfect Christmas too, fresh snow on the ground. All the houses were decorated for Christmas, flickering lights on every roof and an inflatable in every yard. Everyone had the Christmas spirit that year. I don't think there was one house left undecorated. My little brother wanted to drive around and look at all the houses, so I agreed to drive him around if that's what he wanted to do. So we get all bundled up in our winter clothes and pile into my pickup truck. Me in my big puffy winter coat, toboggan, scarf, and sweatpants, and him in his full set of under-cold gear. I swear the little guy lives at the gym and loves to wear anything that shows off the gains. I even turned on the radio to some Christmas music for the extra Christmas spirit. We were just passing the nursing home in a town called The Grove at Washington, and I get this eerie feeling creeping up my spine for some reason as we passed. I've heard stories from patients who've stayed there, and even from workers who worked there. Just a bad nursing home. In a toxic workplace, they can't keep nobody because they keep running people off, have inattentive staff, and are way too short-staffed. Maintenance is lacking too, I guess, as stuff is always breaking down. Back in 2020, they had part of the roof fall and trapped 4 residents who had to be rescued by firefighters. Was all over the news. Anyway, I digress. Well, we get down to the bottom of the hill, and the next thing I know is this 9-foot dark brown-haired creature that looks like a big super buff dog man-looking thing on steroids bolts out from the woods in the middle of the road in front of us. Its fur is all matted with snow, mud, sticks, and leaves. It's got this really nasty-looking scar across its face and some smaller, gnarly-looking gashes across its chest. Its eyes are all bloodshot and red. It was baring its teeth, growling so loud we could hear it over the radio. This thing looks like it's not having a good day. I had to slam on the brakes to avoid hitting it. I'll tell you what, I felt like all the color in my body drained and that my eyes were about to bulge out of my skull Looney Tunes style the moment I saw this thing. My heart was ready to bust out my chest with how fast it was beating. I couldn't do anything but grip the steering wheel tightly. My brother is in the passenger seat, just losing his mind and in absolute hysterics. He was in such hysterics he was trying to hop in my seat and squeezed as close to me as he could, as if I could do anything. This thing the whole time is just in the middle of the road, just looking at us, looking at it. Eventually it just got bored or whatever. It let out just this horrendous howl that just chilled me right to the soul and ran off into some nearby backyards and into the night. It easily cleared every fence until we couldn't see it anymore. We both eventually calmed down enough somewhat to where we could continue our evening. But the whole time we were afraid of bumping into this thing again.
Posted in /x/ but think we'll get more traction here. But it's basically about my scout leader shooting a dogman. Be my scout leader, be age 27-ish, be trying to find self and religion, etc. Decide to go to the Ute tribe since hell the Indians are well known for spirit quests, and he already has a friend from the tribe. It should be said this is set sometime in the late 70s. Be an avid outdoorsman / in-a-woods kind of guy, so also brings along his 1903 Springfield and .30, 06 and some .38 revolver. Keeps the 1903 Springfield in the truck, but gotta keep that thing on you, so stows the .38 revolver in his pants. Meets up with the local tribe and gets introduced through his friend. Gets to know a couple of the head tribesmen and medicine men, who conduct the rituals and help with spirit quests. After a while, asks to join them for a sweat lodge peyote session. Since he's gotten in cool with them, they agree. Have to drive and follow the tribe to some religious sacred ground where they have set up a sweat lodge area. As stated before, keep the rifle in the car but brings along the revolver. As per custom, removes shirt and shoes but keeps on pants. They begin the ritual and everything is going okay. The head tribesman there begins chanting and telling native stories and legends of the tribe. The scout leader starts hallucinating to the stories but is staying semi-coherent. After a while, a howl breaks the air, and the head tribesman grows quiet. The men listen in and hear large steps approaching the tent. Soon, vicious snarling and growling can be heard. The head tribesmen start praying loudly in native and start encouraging the others to do the same. Another howl is heard, this time behind my scout leader. Quickly produces the .38 and snaps around to shoot the creature. A howl of pain is heard before a large paw slashes open the tent. Shortly after, movement can be heard of the creature running away from the tent. The scout leader sees a large, patchy-haired creature with a small bloody gash in its side from the bullet. Now the head tribesman is urging everyone to move towards the vehicles they came in. My scoutmaster rushes to his truck and retrieves the rifle, turns quickly to see the rest of the tribes also producing firearms from their cars. They all start running after the dogman creature, popping off random shots towards it. The dogman, now rushing towards a wooded creek bed, my scoutmaster tries to place at least one good shot in. He steadies himself and levels the rifle center mass at the dogman as he pulls the trigger as calmly as he can. They all hear another howl of pain as it just makes it into the woods. The group decides to keep booking it towards the creature and eventually makes it to the wooded creek bed. Upon reaching the creek bed, they all notice one. They can no longer hear its loud footsteps, 2. The tracks end as soon as it hits the creek. And 3. It's almost impossible to see. After reevaluating possibly getting eaten, they decide to stay grouped up, guns at the ready, and slowly start moving up and down the creek, looking for tracks on either side and can't find any. Quickly all realize it couldn't have made it any farther down the creek without them being able to see it once they got to the creek. They all decide to quit the search and head back to their vehicles. Shortly after, the tribe didn't allow anyone near this part of the reservation. TFW, my scoutmaster, shot this thing with a .30, 06, and it didn't go down. The head tribesman also stated that it couldn't have been a hallucination as everyone saw it, and peyote isn't powerful enough. So that was the time my scoutmaster encountered a dogman.
I am a Texas native and former hog hunter. Most of the areas I used to hunt were on the outskirts of a town called Meridian. There's a ton of what I used to call no man's land. One of the back roads I would travel down at night to get to the hunting spots, or had an exotic animal preserve with these high fences. There was a specific location I would go to, which was desolate in the early hours of the morning. Call me crazy, but I never had any fear of hunting past 12 a.m. I would also wear a night vision monocular and still own a PVS-14 setup now. I never saw a dogman, but I did have an encounter with a large black panther at a small pond. Yes, we have those in Texas. It was a very large cat, and it was lapping water at the pond. I shined a bright white light on it. It looked up to me with these bright yellow eyes before darting off like lightning into the woods. I'm hearing news stories about dogman sightings all around Texas, mostly in the Sam Houston National Forest and down near the hill country. There have also been a few in North Texas. Apparently 5 people have gone missing in the hill country. Their bodies were later found with puncture wounds. Local authorities would label it as a mountain lion attack, or a suicide. Then, strangely enough, black helicopters would show up in the areas, when the situation would start to get spicy like a Texas jalapeno. Are MIBs actively managing these encounters to keep people in the dark about these dogmen? I still do a lot of night hiking with my upgraded PVS-14, but I never have encounters like this. I'm starting to rethink if these night walks are a good idea. We also do have mountain lions where I live, so maybe not the best idea. Also, night hiking with a PVS-14 is best when the moon is full. Isn't the full moon when the dogman comes out?
Perhaps at some point of time, there really was a sapient and civilized race of dog-headed men. Medieval Europeans called them cynocephalus. Some icons within the Orthodox Church would have St. Christopher having a dog head for some reason. His most famous story was that of carrying a child through a river and being astonished by how heavy he was, and later finding out that it was Christ as a child carrying the world. He was supposedly martyred by the Roman Emperor Decius, or maybe Diocletian, in the 3rd century, but outside of that, we know very little of him. He's a very mysterious figure, and nobody really knows his origin. We're not even sure he actually existed. There is an epic about him that first appeared in Greece during the 6th century, but the most popular version on it stems from Golden Legend, a book of hagiographies. Idealized stories of religious leaders, basically. According to the book, he is over 7 feet tall, perhaps 12 feet according to some sources, and was a Canaanite named Reprobus, and was serving a powerful Canaanite king because he was the most powerful figure he knew. The king would make a sign of the cross whenever his jester mentions the devil, so deciding the devil was more powerful, he sought to enter his service. He came across this band of soldiers, and one them claimed to be the devil, so he served under him. They came across a road and happened to stumble across a cross just on the wayside. This struck the soldier, who was apparently perhaps really a demon, with great fear. Rephobus demanded to know why he was scared, and the soldier demon said it was because of Christ and sign. Reprobus thus found a hermit, and the hermit taught him the word of God. Rephobus was very resistant to the man's teachings and suggestions, but he finally relented with the idea of setting up this hut near a river where many travelers supposedly died crossing over. With his great size, physical prowess, and a pole, he saved and guided many travelers. This, along with the Christ child story, further explains why he's the patron saint of travelers in general. During this time, Reprobus met Christ, and that's how his big story happened, and to Rephobus, it was by far his hardest task, as he struggled to lift this tiny kid across the river. When they finally came over, the kid said, "Do not be surprised, for not only did you carry the whole world, but he who created it. I am Christ your King, who you serve, and if you want proof, plant your staff in the ground by your hut, and it will leaf and bear fruit." The next morning, it happened as he said. Around this period, I think he was renamed to Christopher, but I'm not sure. After this, Christopher went to Samos, a city in Lycia, which was a region in Anatolia. He planted his staff to redo the miracle, and thousands were converted because of it. The king didn't like this and sent soldiers after him, but he converted them anyway. Christopher was later imprisoned after refusing to worship the king's pagan gods, and the king tried to use two women, Nicaea and Aquilina, to tempt him from his faith. But again, he just converted them. These women later pulled down his idols, killing them, so I guess they weren't that godlike. The king, pissed beyond belief, tried to torture Christopher with a heated chair and helmet, but nothing happened. The king used hundreds of bowmen, and an arrow did hit, but it hit the king in his eye. Christopher said to him that he will die tomorrow, and that to make a paste of his blood, to rub it in his eye to heal it. Next day he was beheaded, and the king did what he said and prayed to the Abrahamic God. Scholars think a big reason why St. Christopher is thought of as a dogman by some is because of a simple mistranslation of Cananeus, which meant Canaanite, as Caninus, which meant Caninus. People in medieval times often ascribed animalistic characteristics to barbarians, and many people today take the idea of the cynocephaly as the archetype of the periphery man, the ultimate foreigner, which perhaps St. Christopher was. Another interesting interpretation of the epic came from Walter of Speyer, a German poet and bishop who wrote the Vita et Passio Sancti Christophori Martyris, which was far before the Golden Legend, as it was the 11th century, and the Golden Legend came centuries afterwards. In his story, Walter outright depicted him to be a plain-out giant cynocephalus who received baptism by the Christ child and was turned into a human. Perhaps most, if not all, civilized, relatively speaking, cynocephaly were somehow transformed or die out, and the ones reported now in the fringes of society today are their degenerated offspring or something. I don't know. One other thing I would like to note is the relic of St. Christopher's gigantic tooth. It was delivered to Vercelli, and pilgrims all over would travel to look at it. Juan Luis Vives, a Spanish Renaissance humanist, said it was a molar bigger than a fist. However, in the 18th century, a scholar of the natural sciences came over and said it was actually just the tooth of a hippopotamus. Barbabites, the order of priests that were venerating and had the object at that time, kept it away from the altar and forbade public veneration of it. What's weirder is that a preacher called Alessandro Gavazzi said the Barnabites still have it in their monastery as a curiosity.
Reprobus meant reprobate. It's not a real name and was meant as a serious insult.
It could also mean reject or outcast. I'm not too sure. These stories have a certain nature to them. It's difficult to tell what's simply meant to be mythical shorthand and stuff that the teller actually thought is real. Either case, it's all very peculiar. If I had to construct some sort of sensible explanation, Reprobus/Christopher was perhaps just a tall guy for his times and may have hypertrichosis or a similar disorder, or maybe was just really hairy. He pissed off the authorities, and the people constructed more and more of his legend over the ages. St. Christopher may indeed be an amalgamation of several people, in fact, like how some scholars think of Jesus today.
My encounter took place many years ago. I never had the faintest explanation for it until a couple months ago, when I randomly stumbled across Dogman on the internet. I was in my early 20s, working swing shifts at the time and commuting about 100 miles each way, so it was usually around 2 o'clock in the morning by the time I got home. I saw the monster, as I called it, on the northernmost section of Trunk Road in the Matanuska Valley in Alaska. This area is almost smack in between the towns of Palmer and Wasilla. I was only about 10 miles from home at that point, so it must have been around 2 a.m. Trunk Road is a narrow 2-lane road, consisting of nothing but twists and turns. The surrounding terrain is somewhat swampy and thick with black spruce. It was late October, days before Halloween. There was no snow on the ground, but it was cold enough to be wary of ice. I was driving an '82 Subaru station wagon going about 20 miles per hour around a curve when my headlights caught a large dark figure up ahead. I'm bad at judging distance, maybe 6 car lengths away. I instinctively let off the gas, coasting closer. At first I assumed it was a moose as the area is infested with them, but no, it was standing upright. Bear then. No, not a bear. It looked so strange. Tall enough to be an uncommonly large bear, but far too slender. And it looked like it had spikes running down its neck and back. A Halloween prop. It was an odd but effective place for one. All those thoughts ran through my head in a fraction of a second. The car was still coasting closer, and I could see more details. It was standing in profile, gazing across the road. I could clearly see its wolfish muzzle, large upright ears. The spikes on its back were in fact clumps of fur. Its spine curved in a smooth, very natural-looking way. It was standing in the ditch, inches from the pavement. Because I was focused on its upper body, I do not recall anything about its back legs or if it had a tail. I did see its front legs, though, very doggy-looking, hanging awkwardly down and slightly toward its front, exactly as you'd expect if a dog stood upright. While it clearly had a canine look, there was still something off about it that I cannot articulate. It was perfectly still, and at this point, given the proximity to Halloween, I was quite convinced it was some sort of Halloween prop, because it was clearly not any kind of existing animal. I was deeply impressed and gently stepped on the brakes, intending to stop and examine it closely. Then it turned its head towards me. In the tiny fraction of a second that it took for it to swivel its head, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. The fluidness of its movement removed any and all doubt that this was some kind of prop. It was horribly, terrifyingly alive. The pale, off-white glow of its eyeshine in the headlights destroyed any possibility of a human in a costume. I think I sat there gaping at it in shock for a few seconds, the car barely moving by now but still inching closer. As I was almost upon it, I think it could have leaned forward and touched the car if it had wanted. I had to look up to see its face. Again, I'm a bad judge of such things, but I am 5'4", and it was a hell of a lot taller than me. Tall like a polar bear standing. 7 feet 8. I really can't say. I snapped out of my trance and slammed on the gas. The car fishtailed and I prepared myself for death by monster, as I was certain I'd end up in the ditch. But the tires caught the pavement and I drove like a complete maniac all the way home. I did not look back.
Friend finally gets a car when he was 17. A bit nervous, so asks me to go out with him one day. Say sure. Drive to a fairly remote, but still close enough, place one afternoon. Stop for a bit to talk some shit. Quiet place by a cemetery. We're sort of positioned above it, like the cemetery is on lower ground, and the entrance is higher up. Peer into the cemetery. Is that someone digging a grave by hand? Do they still do that? I thought they use those mini diggers now? Whatever he's doing, he has no regard for that earth he's removing. A bit of a bumpkin place, so it wouldn't surprise me if they were digging by hand. A decent distance away, so it's hard to really tell. Peer harder. I'm not sure that's a person. Encourage friend to drive closer to get a better look. It's a dog of some kind digging the shit out of a grave like when dogs dig holes on the beach. Pick related, but imagine it much more aggressively digging as if it had a real purpose. Look around. It's done to several of them. Stops digging and looks right at us, growling. Kinda semi stands up on its hind legs like a person, but it's still hunched over. Shows no kind of struggling to balance, as if it does this shit on a daily basis. Takes a couple of steps toward us, still on its hind legs. Friend panics, pulls a U-turn, gets us the fuck out of Dodge. Never been back. We don't have werewolf or dogman stories or nothing like that where I'm from, but that definitely wasn't an ordinary dog. It wasn't man-sized exactly, not even St. Bernard-sized. It was more like a really big German shepherd. Really big in comparison to the size of a regular German shepherd, but more gray and black rather than all black or black and tan like they usually are.
They are real. I just stay away from them. Where I used to live, I was close to a Bigfoot area, about 30 miles from another Bigfoot site, and 20 to 30 miles from a Dogman site. I am not going to mess with them. Just leave them alone. That is all you have to do. Back when Atlantis was creating weird chimera, they created Dogman servants. I guess they wanted to have a loyal servant that was loyal like the family dog. Back when Atlantis was being destroyed by the reptilians, I guess some folks who were escaping from Atlantis brought their Dogman servants with them. Today, I think that there are dogmen in every state in America. The most reported sightings seem to be Texas, Louisiana, and Michigan. They are in Appalachia, but nobody reports anything in Appalachia. Pick related. Don't pet him, don't feed him, don't take him for a walk. Especially don't run when you see him. Just leave him alone, stay out of his territory. Where is Dogman's territory? It is wherever he says it is.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.